I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to tell a story like this. But here I am, sitting alone in a quiet house, staring at the wedding ring that once meant everything to me. If you've ever believed in true love, if you've ever thought marriage was forever, you'll understand why my heart shattered the way it did. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how the woman I loved more than my own life pretended to love me back, and how my ruthless revenge made her regret every single day she betrayed me. It all started 5 years ago when I met Daniel. Daniel was charming in a way that disarmed me. He wasn't just handsome, though his deep brown eyes and confident smile could melt anyone's heart. He was attentive. He made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. We met at a friend's birthday dinner, and while everyone else was busy laughing and drinking, Daniel and I sat in the corner, talking about everything from childhood dreams to favorite books. By the end of the night, I knew he was different. By the end of the week, we were inseparable. Fast forward 2 years, Daniel proposed to me in the most romantic way possible. He rented out a small vineyard on the outskirts of the city, got down on one knee under twinkling fairy lights, and asked me to be his forever. I said yes, of course. Tears streamed down my face as he slipped that diamond ring onto my finger. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple. And for a long time, I believed that too. Marriage felt like a dream in the beginning. We bought a cozy home together, painted the walls ourselves, and filled the rooms with laughter and love. He would surprise me with breakfast in bed, write little notes for me to find in my purse, and whisper, "You're my everything," every night before we fell asleep. But dreams, they don't last forever, do they? It started small. Late nights at the office, missed dinners, conversations that felt shorter, colder, emptier. At first, I brushed it off. Daniel worked in finance, and I knew how demanding his job could be. I told myself it was just stress, that things would go back to normal once his workload eased up. But deep down, something gnawed at me. Then came the lies. One evening, I cooked his favorite meal, steak with garlic butter and mashed potatoes, hoping to cheer him up. He walked in, looking exhausted, tie loosened, hair messy. When I asked how his day was, he gave me a vague smile and said, "Oh, just the usual. Meetings, numbers, you know." But later that night, when he went to shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I never snooped. I trusted him. But something about the way the screen lit up with a woman's name I didn't recognize made my stomach twist. "Can't wait to see you again." I froze. My heart slammed against my chest. My vision blurred with tears. I wanted to believe it was innocent, a misunderstanding, maybe a colleague, maybe a friend. But that heart emoji told me otherwise. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I swallowed my pain, pretending everything was fine, while inside I was breaking. The next few weeks were torture. Every time he picked up his phone, every time he smiled at a text, I wondered if it was her. I began noticing the perfume on his shirts, not mine. The way he showered immediately after coming home. The excuses, working late, business trip, meeting ran long. But here's the cruelest part. Whenever I tried to talk to him, he'd look me dead in the eye and say, "Emily, don't you trust me? You're my wife. Stop overthinking." His words made me feel guilty, like I was the one ruining our marriage by doubting him. So I stayed silent, until one night changed everything. Daniel said he was going out for drinks with colleagues. I nodded, kissed him goodbye, and told him to have fun. But as soon as he left, something inside me snapped. I grabbed my keys, got into my car, and followed him. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel, my breath shallow with dread. He drove across town, not to a bar, but to a quiet restaurant by the river. I parked a little distance away, my heart hammering as I watched him walk inside. Minutes later, she appeared. A tall, elegant woman with long dark hair, wearing a red dress that clung to her curves. She smiled as she slipped her hand into Daniel's, and they walked in together like lovers who had done this 1,000 times. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run inside and expose them right there. But instead, I sat frozen, tears streaming down my face, my entire world crashing around me. That night, when Daniel came home, smelling faintly of wine and her perfume, he kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. Like I was blind. Like I was a fool. And maybe I was. But what he didn't know was that something inside me had changed forever. That night, As I lay awake next to the man who betrayed me, I promised myself one thing. If he thought he could pretend to love me while giving his heart to someone else, then he had no idea who he was dealing with. Because I was no longer the naive, trusting wife he thought I was. I was a woman planning her revenge. And Daniel was about to suffer in ways he never imagined. But first, I needed proof. And the very next day, I started digging. To be continued. Emily has just discovered Daniel's betrayal and secretly vows revenge, beginning to gather proof. The morning after I followed Daniel to that riverside restaurant, something inside me was different. I woke up beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, but instead of crying or begging for answers, I forced myself to smile. I played my role perfectly. To him, I was still the doting wife who trusted him blindly. But behind that smile, my mind was already calculating. I knew I needed more than suspicions, more than the memory of seeing him hold another woman's hand. If I wanted to destroy him, if I wanted him to suffer for every tear I shed, I needed undeniable proof. So, I became an actress. When he left for work, I kissed him on the cheek, packed his lunch, and waved from the door like the perfect little wife. But the moment he drove off, I grabbed my laptop and started digging. The first place I looked was his phone. I knew his passcode. It hadn't changed in years. But Daniel was careful. He deleted messages, cleared call logs. At first, I thought I was chasing shadows. Then I realized he had installed a second messaging app, one hidden away in a folder labeled Finance. And there it was. Dozens of messages from her. Her name was Claire. Last night was amazing. I miss you already. When are you going to tell her the truth? The truth. Those words made my blood run cold. So this wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just meaningless flirting. He had promised her something. But what? I screenshotted every message, every heart emoji, every promise. I emailed them to myself from an anonymous account, careful to cover my tracks. My hands were shaking, but my resolve hardened. When Daniel came home that evening, I acted normal. I served him dinner, asked about his day, laughed at his jokes. Meanwhile, I pictured the way his face would look when he realized I had everything. Still, I needed more. Screenshots weren't enough. I wanted to see the betrayal in motion. The next night, when he claimed he was working late, I hired a cab and followed him again. I stayed far behind, watching as he pulled into a hotel parking lot. My chest tightened, but I forced myself not to cry. Instead, I pulled out my phone and recorded. I filmed him meeting her in the lobby. I filmed the way he kissed her, openly, shamelessly, before they went upstairs together. That video was my weapon. But I wasn't ready to use it yet. Not until I knew just how deep his lies went. Over the next week, I lived a double life. By day, I was Emily, the loving wife. By night, I was a shadow, following him, recording every rendezvous, saving every piece of evidence. And then, one evening, I got the shock that made my blood boil. Daniel wasn't just cheating. He was planning a future with her. I discovered an email he forgot to log out of on our shared computer. It was from a real estate agent, addressed to both Daniel and Claire. They were looking at houses he planned to buy with her, using money from our joint account. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined. Not only was he giving her his time, his body, his affection, he was preparing to steal our life together and hand it to her. That night, as he lay asleep beside me, I stared at him, my chest rising and falling with fury. His face looked so peaceful, so innocent, but I knew the truth, and the truth gave me strength. "Go ahead, Daniel," I whispered into the darkness. "Play your game. Pretend to love me. But soon, very soon, you'll learn what it feels like to lose everything." The next step was planning. Revenge wasn't something you rushed. It was something you crafted carefully, like a work of art. I started small. I withdrew bits of money from our accounts, moving them into one only I could access. I told Daniel I was paying off student loans, and he didn't question it. He was too distracted, too confident in his lies. I also reached out to a private investigator, someone who could dig even deeper than I could. Within days, he handed me a folder thick with photos and reports. There they were, Daniel and Claire, on dinner dates, weekend getaways, even shopping for furniture. But it was one detail that broke me completely. Claire wasn't just anyone. She was his coworker. He had introduced me to her once at a company party. I remembered shaking her hand, smiling at her, even thanking her for taking care of Daniel at work. All the while, she was stabbing me in the back. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. Still, I kept my mask on. I let Daniel believe I was clueless. I laughed at his excuses, kissed him goodbye, and pretended not to notice when he forgot to wear his wedding ring. But inside, I was no longer his wife. I was his enemy. The day came when Daniel told me he'd be working late again. I smiled sweetly, kissed his cheek, and wished him luck. But this time, I didn't follow him. This time, I prepared my trap. I set up hidden cameras around the house, connected to my phone. I printed out the screenshots of his texts, the hotel videos, the investigator's photos. I laid them all neatly inside a folder, which I locked in my desk drawer. And then I waited, because I knew the moment of confrontation was coming. And when it came, I would be ready to shatter his perfect little lie. But what I didn't know yet was that Daniel wasn't the only one hiding something, because Claire had her own secrets. And soon I'd learn just how dangerous she really was. Emily is prepared with proof of Daniel's betrayal, but Claire, the other woman, may not be who she seems, hinting at an even darker twist. They say the worst part of betrayal is the moment you realize the person you trusted has been living a double life. But the worst part for me wasn't that Daniel loved someone else. I could stomach that in a twisted, awful way. The worst part was discovering how deep the rot went, that he had been making decisions that would drag me down with him. Decisions I would later have to pay for. After weeks of watching, waiting, and manipulating from the shadows, I finally got the break I needed. Vanessa, bless her gullible heart, trusted my fake account enough to talk about Daniel honestly. She boasted about things she thought were private, how special he made her feel, how he told her he was unhappy at home, and, most dangerously, how he had started transferring personal funds into a joint account he managed at work. That was the moment the world narrowed to a single point. Personal funds. Joint account. Work. My stomach dropped. I knew Daniel handled client accounts as part of his job. I'd seen the way he kept meticulous ledgers, the way he'd stay up late reconciling numbers. I had always admired that about him, his precision. I never imagined it could be weaponized. I needed to know the truth. So I asked Claire to dig deeper, this time into his workplace. Claire called me the day she found what I'd feared, discrepancies in client ledgers and a trail of transfers that shouldn't have existed. Small at first, easily explainable. But then a pattern emerged, larger sums rerouted, invoices duplicated, payments delayed. Someone was moving money around, and all signs pointed to Daniel. I remember holding that printout like a verdict. On one side, numbers, dates, account IDs. On the other, the face of the man who slept beside me. I couldn't help the shake in my hands as I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring, breathless. Hey, everything okay? Fine, I said, keeping my voice steady. Actually, can you swing by the house? I need to talk. He laughed softly, the same lazy affection he always used to diffuse whatever I brought up. If it's about dinner, I already ate. But I'll be there, he said. When he walked through the door, he looked like a man who'd just closed a big meeting, confident, satisfied. He kissed me and dropped his bag by the couch. You okay? He asked again, concern in his eyes. I handed him a stack of papers. Explain these, I said. For the first time since I met him, his face went pale. He took the papers, scanning them with increasing speed. Where did you get these? He asked, and his voice was a mix of fear and anger now. Where do you think? I had a friend look into some things. Care to explain why funds from your clients are being moved into accounts tied to your name? My voice was cold, deliberate. He swallowed. It's not what it looks like. It looks like embezzlement, Daniel. I watched him crumble in slow motion. He started to stammer, forming the kind of explanations people invent when reality is catching up to them. I was helping a client move money for liquidity, he said. It's temporary. I'm going to fix it. Temporary? I echoed. Like your affair? He laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound. This is different, This is about work. I'm under pressure. You don't understand. Promotions, targets. You lied to me. The words tore out of me. You lied about your nights out, about the time you spent with colleagues. And you lied to those clients. People could lose their life savings because of you. He paced, his hands running through his hair. Then he stopped and looked at me, really looked at me, as if searching for a person he once loved and couldn't find. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said. I meant to fix it before anyone noticed. Vanessa. I flinched at the name. He looked guilty, and then angrier than I'd ever seen him. She doesn't know the details, I told her I was separating. I didn't expect. You didn't expect to ruin lives, you mean. The fury in me rose like a tide. You used our marriage as an alibi and your job as a cover. Everything you touched was a lie. He moved closer, voice low. Please, Emily, don't do this. I can sort it. Sort it? I echoed. You're asking me to trust you two, sort it after you've been cheating and stealing? My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. The betrayal had split the floor from under me and left a canyon of anger and humiliation. He looked like he might cry. I almost believed him. Maybe because part of me still wanted to believe the man I married existed somewhere under that mess. But then Claire's voice came back to me, rational, pragmatic. Make him fall on his own sword, she had said. Don't hand him a way out. If you want him to suffer, let the consequences come from his choices. And so I chose consequences. Over the next days, I sat in the quiet house and plotted like a strategist. If Daniel's errors were financial, that was the most potent weapon I had. Expose him, not only as a cheating husband, but as a crook in public. Let the professional facade he so carefully built be torn away. But I had to be surgical. If I went to the wrong authorities without absolute proof, I could be accused of fabricating evidence. I needed airtight documentation. Claire supplied more: bank records, timestamp transfer logs, screenshots of suspicious emails. Each piece of paper tightened the noose. At the same time, I continued to play the loving wife by day and the silent hunter by night. I fed Vanessa crumbs, small lies that would lead her to trust me fully. I encouraged her belief that Daniel would leave his wife and marry her. I was training her to hope for something that would never come. Then came the turning point, one that revealed a deeper, uglier layer of betrayal. One afternoon, while searching through Daniel's office drawer for a flash drive I'd planted earlier, I found something I could not have imagined. A signed separation agreement draft and a stack of envelopes addressed to a child's daycare center and to a woman I didn't recognize. The handwriting was angular and precise. My heart froze. Soon after, another envelope with a sonogram image slipped out from between the papers. I held the sonogram against the light. A tiny, perfect crescent. A future. The world narrowed again. Vanessa was pregnant. My hands tightened around the paper until it creased. The betrayal turned sickening. Not only had Daniel promised me forever while building another life with someone else, he had also planned a child with her, a living, breathing symbol of his betrayal. The realization crashed over me like icy water. I felt something cold and final settle inside me. The plans changed. This was no longer just about financial ruin. There was a child in the equation now, a life that would suffer if I burned everything down. I could destroy Daniel's career and reputation, but what about the baby? What about Vanessa? I closed my eyes and made a decision that surprised even me. If he thought he could replace me, he had mistaken kindness for weakness. I would not let his selfishness make an innocent suffer. I would dismantle him, bit by precise bit, without harming the one who had no choice in this. But first I needed to pull Vanessa completely into my web, so she would be perfectly positioned when I cut the threads. That night, as Daniel slept oblivious beside me, I held the sonogram to my chest and whispered into the dark, "You made your bed. Now lie in it." And then I smiled. Emily discovers Vanessa is pregnant with Daniel's child and decides she must change her plan to protect the innocent life while still ensuring Daniel's destruction. Do you want me to continue with the next part? After I found the sonogram, everything in me sharpened to a single, terrible focus. The betrayal had become three-dimensional: a laugh, a secret, a heartbeat. For a moment, I felt like I could have crumbled into 1,000 pieces, and it would have been understandable. Instead, I folded those pieces into something harder. A plan that would protect the small, growing life I discovered on that thin printout, and break the man who tried to build a future behind my back. The first thing I did was drop the fake account. Vanessa had trusted the stranger. She didn't need another. Instead, I created a bridge. I reached out to her under my real name, softly, carefully. I told her I was worried about Daniel. I didn't accuse her outright. I told her I was struggling with some things at home, that marriage had become complicated, and I wanted someone to talk to who understood relationships. She wrote back within hours. "Thank you," she messaged. "I feel so stupid." I kept telling myself he loved me. I didn't want to believe he could be that cruel. We met for coffee in a crowded cafe, neutral ground where no one knew either of us. She looked younger in person, exhausted in a way that made my chest ache. She told me about the way Daniel had whispered promises in the dark, about how he'd said the separation was imminent, about the times she'd waited for him to call, and how he'd always had an excuse. She showed me pictures of texts and a receipt or two. In return, I showed her nothing of Claire's dossier. I couldn't yet. Instead, I offered her something more dangerous: comfort and a safe place to choose what she wanted without pressure from Daniel. "You deserve better," I told her, and I meant it. Not the version of better that meant marrying a liar, but a kinder better, one that protected her and the baby from the fallout of Daniel's choices. She looked at me with those wide, hopeful eyes, and for the first time since I caught them in that restaurant, I felt genuine pity for her. "You could expose him," she whispered one afternoon, tears in her voice. "But I'm pregnant, I don't want a war. I just want security." Her hands trembled over the rim of her coffee cup. The plea lodged in my throat like a stone. Security. That single word altered everything I'd imagined. I had wanted to make him suffer until there was nothing left. But a child, innocent, unmade of anyone's sins, deserved safety. I could feel the fight in me wanting to scorch him to nothing. But my better, colder plan, my plan that had taken weeks of careful construction, won out. "Then we make sure you get security," I said. "And we make sure Daniel pays. Not just with words, but with consequences, so he can't do this to anyone else." Vanessa agreed to let me help. It wasn't hard to persuade her. The relief on her face when I offered to go with her to appointments and help with paperwork was almost enough to make me forget the rage that still simmered under my ribs. While I played the part of guardian angel to Vanessa, Claire and I worked on the other front. We were meticulous. We built a timeline of transfers and falsified invoices, linking client accounts to shell entities, and then tying those entities back to accounts Daniel controlled. Claire, who had contacts at a forensic accounting firm, had someone run a deeper analysis. It was ugly, precise, and damning. "You have to be prepared," Claire warned the night she slid another stack of documents across my kitchen table. "If this goes public, it will ruin him, and people will hate him. But also, if you want to protect Vanessa and that baby, we can structure it so they get a settlement or some kind of protection. We can set up a trust for the child with conditions that prevent Daniel from touching it." Hearing Claire say the word trust made me feel almost maternal in my planning. I imagined a small rounded face years from now, a child who wouldn't have to suffer because of his father's weakness. The idea calmed me. It focused me. The next step was to plant doubts where Daniel could see them, to make him make mistakes. We couldn't simply deliver the evidence to his bosses and walk away. If we did, Vanessa and the baby could be collateral damage in a corporate tempest. No, we needed leverage. We needed to force Daniel to reveal himself, to make the missteps public in a way that would ensure the firm's compliance team moved quickly and set aside funds for those harmed before the press could turn the story into a circus. I began leaving accidental traces of information. An envelope with an anonymous tip dropped into the firm's HR mailbox with just enough details to trigger a compliance review. A printed bank statement lost on the reception desk. A photograph of Daniel entering a motel with Vanessa that found its way to a staffer who owed Claire a favor. Small, surgical nudges that set the chain reaction in motion without making me look like the one who pulled the strings. Meanwhile, I tightened my relationship with Vanessa. I accompanied her to a prenatal scan and held her hand when she cried. I took callous satisfaction in the way she leaned on me, unaware that the same woman offering her safety was also preparing to unmask her partner. It felt wrong, sometimes, to use compassion as a tool. But if compassion could secure the child's future and bring down a liar, then it was a weapon I'd wield without regret. Then Daniel made his first real error. He started to panic. The man who had once been smooth and unflappable became skittish. He called me at odd hours, asked where I was going, who I'd been with, and the questions were so transparent I could almost laugh. I answered precisely, always on the brink of telling him nothing. I let him twist himself into knots. When he asked about Claire, I lied. She's a friend from college. She's helping me with a charity event. When he asked about a meeting he didn't have, I said, oh, that was rescheduled. His aggression escalated. He began to pick fights, fishing for confessions, trying to unnerve me into revealing the extent of my knowledge. Once, he shoved a glass against the table with enough force to shatter it. If you're messing with me, he hissed. I stared at him, unflinching. I'm not. My voice was quiet. But you are. The words hit like an accusation and a threat. He stormed out, slamming the door. I watched him go, and for the first time, I felt pity unpolished by anger. He was unraveling, and I had put him there. But there was one more thing to do. One move I had saved for last because it would hurt him where he cared most, his reputation. Claire arranged a meeting with an attorney who specialized in corporate fraud. We didn't go straight to the press. That would be theater. Instead, we built a legal package, client statements, bank records, email chains, and the motel photo. The attorney promised discretion and swift action if we presented the evidence to the firm's legal department and to the regulator simultaneously. The idea was to box Daniel in so he couldn't negotiate his way out. As I sat in the lawyer's office, a red digital light blinked on my phone. A new text. Unknown number. If you do this, he'll make sure you lose everything. My thumb hovered over the screen, my breath catching. The threat trembled in the air like a cold breath on the back of my neck. For a heartbeat, I thought of walking away, of folding the papers back into the drawer, letting the betrayal rot in private. But I thought of the sonogram, Vanessa's whispered plea for security, Claire's steady voice. I thought of the man who had lied and planned and nearly destroyed the lives around him. I opened the attorney's file, placed my hand on the stack of documents, and felt the weight of what was to come. Then I stood up, lifted my chin, and said, send it. Emily hits send on the legal package that will trigger an investigation, but the anonymous threat suggests Daniel knows something, and the immediate fallout could expose more than just his crimes. People always ask me later, when they hear the story, when they gasp at the headlines, when they ask how I kept my nerve, whether I ever felt anything besides hatred. The truth is more complicated. There were nights when I wanted to crawl under the bed and never come out. There were mornings when I stared at my reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. Revenge is not a clean thing. It's a slow, greasy machine that eats you as it eats the person you hate. But if you're going to break someone, you learn to steel yourself. You learn to breathe through the pain. You learn to let patience do the cutting. When I clicked send on that legal package, the papers went to the firm, the regulator, and the attorney simultaneously. It was surgical. No leaks, no grandstanding. Within 48 hours, the firm placed Daniel on administrative leave while an internal audit began. Within a week, the regulator froze several of the suspect accounts pending investigation. The press had not yet been invited. That would come later, when the system had already moved to secure victims' funds and protect Vanessa and her child. Daniel's panic was a living thing. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. He called nonstop, left frantic voicemails, threatened, pleaded. I read every message in the quiet of our house and felt a cold, almost clinical satisfaction. He was finally feeling the sting of consequences. But the part that twisted me was how quickly he started to turn on everyone, blaming colleagues, scapegoating junior staff, pointing fingers at anyone but himself. They walked him out of his office on a gray Thursday, his face drawn and defeated, the cameras hungrily capturing the moment for whoever wanted to sell it. The news cycle was merciless. By the time his mugshot was released, everyone knew his name. Lawyers buzzed like flies. Calls came from reporters I'd never spoken to. Strangers left messages of condemnation and pity in equal measure. I did not go to the press. I did not dance on his ruin. Instead, I met with the firm's compliance officer and the regulator's representative in a small conference room and handed them the rest of what we had: the emails, the shell company registrations, the ledger reconciliations. I watched as they nodded, as they made the next calls, as they arranged for restitution to be set aside. I asked that Vanessa and the unborn child be protected, that any settlement include a trust with restricted access to ensure Daniel could not touch those funds. They obliged. When the arraignment came, I sat in the back row of the courtroom, heart a wild, terrified drum inside my ribs. Daniel stood before the judge looking smaller than he ever had. Vanessa sat to my left, hands folded tight around a tissue, the new baby bump around, stubborn promise beneath her coat. She had agreed to testify if needed. She had agreed to let the legal system do what I couldn't without becoming the monster people would hate. She had trusted me enough to let me fight for her security. Watching him in that moment, I felt the old love, the naive, stupid kind, sudden and sharp and gone. In its place was something that might have been justice or cruelty, depending on who told the story. The prosecution moved quickly. Daniel's attempts to shift blame imploded when matched with the dry, merciless numbers. Witnesses corroborated the timeline. Within months, pleas were discussed. Offers were made. He tried to bargain, less time, cooperation, the promise of a public apology. I sat through it all, expression neutral, the face of someone who had already taken more from him than the state could. Then came the final meeting that would bind everything. The regulator demanded a confession. The firm insisted on public statements and immediate restitution plans. Daniel, cornered and hollowed out, signed documents that would ensure victims were paid and that his access to financial accounts would be permanently severed. He also signed a settlement that established a trust for Vanessa's child, with a guardian and legal terms that prevented him from having unilateral control. There was a day when I thought that would be enough. There was a day when seeing him taken away in cuffs, the press shouting questions, the judge imposing penalties, felt like the end of a long, ugly chapter. But endings are not so simple, because even as the legal machinery did its work, human consequences tangled in ways I hadn't fully expected. Vanessa's relief was a fragile thing. She cried openly, hugged me until we both trembled, and told me she felt like she could breathe again. The baby would be safe, financially at least. But the emotional cost was heavier. She looked at me once after the courthouse and whispered, "How could you use me like that?" The question landed like a stone. I blinked, stunned. "Use you?" I asked, because admitting the truth would have been like opening a wound I was not ready to show. "You lied to me," she said. "You told me you were my friend. You told me you wanted to help. I believed you." Her voice cracked. "Did you ever think about what I needed? Or were you just making me a piece in your plan?" Her accusation unearthed an ugly truth. I had used her. Yes. I had folded compassion into strategy. But my reason, the reason I told myself as I traced ledger lines and plotted legal steps, was that I wanted the child protected. I wanted Vanessa safe. It was a justification that sat uncomfortably with me even then. I opened my mouth to explain, to soften, but the words felt like excuses. In the weeks that followed, Daniel was sentenced. He would serve time. The firm paid restitution. Vanessa moved into a small apartment with support from the trust. The baby was born on a cold morning in November, a small boy with Daniel's eyes and Vanessa's stubborn chin. They named him Noah. I visited once, at Vanessa's request, because she said she wanted me in the child's life as someone who had helped protect him. Her gratitude was careful, and our conversations were clipped. We both knew the only thing we had in common was the damage Daniel had caused. The town moved on. People debated our story at coffee shops and on comment threads, making judgments in black and white. Some called me a hero. Others called me a villain. I did not much care what strangers thought anymore. I cared about the nights I lay awake, imagining the little life sleeping soundly somewhere because I had made choices that spared him harm. And then, months later, the anonymous text arrived. "You think this is over?" He wrote. The message felt like a slap. My stomach dropped and my hands went cold. My mind flashed back to the early threats, to the time Daniel had spoken in veiled threats, to the way his pride could turn into something dangerous. I blocked the number and told myself it was an empty threat, posturing from a desperate man. But the messages didn't stop. At first, they were sporadic. A voicemail left on my phone with heavy breathing. An unsigned letter slipped under my door with a single line, "Liars get what they deserve." Then, the one that unspooled everything, a photograph mailed to me with no return address. It was a photo of Daniel sitting in the visiting room at the prison. He was talking to someone I didn't recognize. But as I leaned in, my throat tightening, I saw the glint of metal at the man's temple. A familiar ring I recognized with a jolt. The camera angle showed the profile of the visitor, a pair of familiar shoulders, the way the collar curled. And on the table, beside the coffee cup, was a slim envelope with my name on it. My breath stopped. I flipped the picture over. On the back, in messy handwriting, "You should have left well enough alone." The universe narrowed down to that sentence. All the careful plans, the legal triumphs, the trust for the baby, they existed now under a new, darker shadow. Someone wanted me to know they could reach me, even through concrete and steel and court orders. Someone wanted to remind me that revenge invited retaliation. I stood in my kitchen with that photograph trembling in my hands and heard, from somewhere far away, the heavy, distant hum of life continuing as if nothing had happened. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I picked it up. A voice I thought I'd buried said softly, "You don't know the half of it, Emily. And you never will." Emily thought she'd won until the photograph and the anonymous call suggest someone else is still playing the game and that the truth is far from finished.